I love coaching women who are in transitions in their lives and helping them just come to a sense of confidence and direction and clarity about where they feel that their life is going or could go. And within that, I specifically really love working with women who are transitioning out of organized religion, in particular Christianity. I came out of the tradition of the Protestant church, which is typically the more moderate to progressive expression of Christianity in Western Christianity, specifically in the US. But I found that it really restricted my personal understanding of spirituality and really limited my self growth in a way that I could really no longer participate in. And so, in my own personal experience, I find that that helps other women who are making similar transitions to not feel the sense of anxiety or shame or isolation that may come with leaving sort of a more organized religious community, and to see the possibilities and the potential and the freedom that comes with making that decision. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time today to share a little bit about how I understand my own journey out of Christianity or beyond Christianity, to demystify it, to make it feel less scary, and again, less isolating for those who may be considering it, but those who maybe were clergy in that context or currently are still serving in that context, or those who have been sort of peripheral parishioners or people sitting in the pew a couple times a year who really just feel like this does not resonate with one's sense of self and personal growth and spirituality. So I really did not grow up in a very religious household. I mean, both my parents were churchgoers. My dad grew up pretty formally Catholic in a kind of an Irish Catholic context, and my mom grew up somewhat loosely in the Presbyterian church. The funny story is that her mother went to the local Presbyterian church with a neighbor because my grandmother and her siblings, sort of the household was split where her father brought the one son to the Catholic church and the mother brought the daughters to the Protestant church, but my great-grandmother didn't go to church. So my grandmother ended up going to a Presbyterian church with a neighbor. And so my mom was pretty well versed in that tradition and ended up with my dad's approval of this, raising my brother and I in that tradition, but very loosely. I never felt like it was sort of the predominant element of our life. We went to church most Sundays. I felt kind of lukewarm about it. I had a couple friends at the church, but it just never really felt like it was a space that I could express the fullest of myself. I've always been a very creative and spirited child, and also very much movement and dancing was part of my life. And I always felt really restricted in these very sort of stoic Protestant worship services. And so, like most kids, I think I spent most of the time passing notes to my friends and scribbling over the church program. I ended up going to seminary much later in my life as a second career. I was in a career in politics after college, never went to church during college, was always very interested in spirituality and to a certain extent rituals and a feeling of the sacred in everyday life. That's always been part of my life. So that never left me. But I would never say that I sort of had a straight path toward being an ordained clergy, which I eventually became in my 30s. So I came to it as a second career, very hesitantly. Going to seminary was never on my radar. No one in my family had ever done that. This was something that was out of a deep curiosity for me. Perhaps this was a way in which I could help people in their spiritual journey as well, also having kind of a structure. There was a real profession to this within the Protestant church of being an ordained clergy. So I went that route, initially being dual enrolled at a seminary with both the Master of Divinity and also a Master of Marriage and Family Therapy. Ended up dropping the therapy degree, feeling like I did have some curiosity toward interpreting scripture in a way that would be really expansive for people. I've really never been a Bible reader. In fact, the only times I really read the Bible was in seminary and in preparing for sermons when I would preach every Sunday for almost 10 years. But I don't read the Bible. I don't like a lot of the Bible. In fact, it's really, I do find it to be a problematic text and creates a lot of harm in society. That being said, I really fell in love with the Hebrew scriptures, mostly because of an incredible professor, a feminist Hebrew scholar at my seminary who introduced me to these incredible narratives of women in the Hebrew scriptures, which in Christian circles is known as the Old Testament. I don't use that terminology, but the Hebrew scriptures really is filled with these incredible, rich narratives of women who are really doing subversive kind of acts and action in communities that really restricted women's voices. It was really inspiring from a feminist perspective. But ultimately, in my experience as a pastor, I found there to be real limitations within the Christian theology that I really feel so liberated and relieved to have let go of. I joke with a lot of people now that even though I was a pastor for 10 years, I never considered myself to be religious. I've held church and the idea of church very lightly, which is also why it's been relatively, I wouldn't say easy, but less traumatizing to kind of leave that world behind, because I never really put all my eggs in one basket, so to speak. That was never really the totality of my spirituality. In fact, I more or less tried to fit myself into that to make it a viable profession, but never really enabled myself to be fully expansively transparent about my spiritual identity. So the three areas that I want to talk about in terms of embracing a post-Christian life and really pointing out the areas that I saw problematic within Protestant church culture. I will talk about theology, I will talk about relationality or the social element, and then ritual. And this, I hope, will be perhaps a pathway for people who are needing to have affirmation and more confidence and stepping out and saying, look, there's life beyond this. So specifically with theology, I never signed on to the theology of salvation, that that you need to be saved by this outside being in Christianity known as Jesus or Christ. That theology never resonated with me. I felt like I always had a personal relationship with a higher power, that I didn't sort of need this this middleman, so to speak. Obviously, there are other positive elements of sort of the Jesus figure, or in particular, the Jesus, the human, which I do like and am interested in. I have a very, what's called a low Christology, where I'm interested in Jesus as the human who does really radical things to transform and make more equitable society in general. I think there's a lot of things we can learn there. But in terms of this salvific figure that comes in and sort of saves you, I feel like is really problematic, especially for women. And I found in my research on clergy women who are leaving active ministry, one in particular just had this really incredible understanding of the fact that salvific theology, the theology that you need to be saved, really silences and prevents women from developing this internal voice of capacity that says, I can do this on my own. I have the wherewithal to develop the life that I want. I can self-actualize and determine the outcomes in my life in really powerful ways. When you have a salvific theology, that sometimes and in many ways can get suppressed. I will say, though, that I've worked with a lot of women who have had really difficult lives, in particular survivors of domestic abuse, sexual violence, neglect, etc. And those who do come to Christianity with that deep sense of brokenness, that salvific theology can be really life-saving. But I think more long-term, once women are sort of rehabilitated and recovering from intense trauma, it can unfortunately build a pathway of decreased efficacy in one's own ability to make one's choices on their own. So I do think it's a helpful theology for certain paths and certain individuals who need that kind of, close the door on one life and start fresh in a new life. That salvific theology can be really helpful, but overall I can see it as harmful to women. I also see theologies around forgiveness as being extremely harmful for women because it, I think, causes women too quickly to override instances of abuse, instances of disrespect, instances of harm, and a desire to restore relationship too soon, and oftentimes with people for which that restored relationship is not a priority for them. So I think forgiveness, it's a two-way street. One can put positive energy toward any kind of relationship, but when that's not reciprocated, I think ongoing beliefs and theologies of forgiveness can really put women in really precarious relationships and social dynamics that can be extremely harmful. And lastly, I found this very much as an ordained clergy are issues that I have around theologies of servant leadership or servanthood in general. Servant leadership is, in general, a positive and ethical way of being in the world. I mean, it promotes humanization in between relationships, and it breaks down hierarchies. But when you have a society in general that still focuses a lot on female servanthood, if you then meld that with these expectations of servant leadership, plus feminized servanthood, which I experienced a lot in the Protestant church, it can be really damaging for women who then are expected to be everything to everyone in ways that's really abusive. So those three areas are what I would say became the primary theological roadblocks for me when determining whether I wanted to continue in this sort of Christian context. Relationality is another big issue within Protestant America. Again, that's the context that I'm familiar with personally and professionally. Generationally, Protestantism is a very old denomination. There's not a lot of younger generations and families coming into it. It's a little bit stoic and sort of de-energizing, honestly, as a spiritual expression. That's why a lot of young people who do align with Christianity go to these more sort of energizing, more mega churches, which I get it. I just don't like the conservative theology that comes out of them. So unfortunately, Protestantism, which has really progressive and liberal theologies in some ways, relationally and socially is really quite conservative, even if on paper, politically, the parishioners are more liberal. But there's definitely ingrained sexism. This is particularly true for women clergy who are leaving, who are in my generation. I'm 41 at this time, and so Gen X and millennial and younger women are being pushed out of the ministry because the church can't digest this understanding of younger clergy women having autonomy, agency, and authority, and they scapegoat us out, push us out, and in some ways I'm relieved that that's been the case for me because it really finally got me out, to which I'm really grateful. So you have sort of these generational narratives, sexist narratives, and then to be honest, I would say a lot of Christians and Christian expression in society at large, I think has a tendency to be really judgmental. When you have a faith that says this way is the only way, or believe in Jesus as the way, the truth, and the life, it can really cause people to develop a personal theology that's really judgmental toward people who don't believe in that same way. I think Protestantism has really tried to be expansive and expand what it means to belong as opposed to what it means to believe. But still, I just feel like now that I've left, it just feels like a real relief to not be surrounding myself with people that are just really judgmental. And then lastly, a really wonderful reason why I have left organized religion, particularly Christianity, is that it has given me this opportunity to reclaim ritual in my life that's both pre-Christian and post-Christian. So I always knew all along, and I always preached on this as well, that almost all of Christian ritual comes from prior rituals that are pre-Christian and kind of pre-Judaism as well. A lot of it has been co-opted from Jewish tradition and sort of be kind of branded as Christian tradition. But even really Jewish tradition and tradition from the Hebrew scriptures is very much based in harvest, cyclical seasons, transitions that you find in nature that I think are really powerful to reclaim once someone has left that more restricted doctrinal religious context. So for me, I have found reclaiming the rituals in my life that are distinctly seasonal, earth-based, and also based on the feminine sacred has been really life-giving for me. And it helps me to recontextualize ritual as not monopolized by Christianity. I think some people are really afraid to leave sort of toxic Christianity because they feel, well, what am I going to have to teach my children? What are going to be the kind of yearly annual rituals that we base our lives around? Well, I've been doing that for the past several years, having left organized religion and the church, and it's so enriching, and my children love it. My husband and I really enjoy developing these rituals that have so much meaning based in the here and now, not on sort of ancient rituals that have themselves been co-opted from other previous traditions. So I find that there's a real coming home to that kind of spirituality for me that has made leaving the church that much easier, that much more life-giving. And it's something that I really embrace and help others embrace as well, because I think there is a lot of fear and isolation that might come with closing the door on that organized religion, that church experience, especially if it's been something that's been in your life really for most of your life. But there is this really expansive, beautiful, life-giving experience beyond it that really has become the bedrock of my life, the bedrock of my coaching practice, the bedrock of my family life. It also has meant that relationships that were within that context, that previous religious space, are no longer as meaningful to me. And I think that's okay too. I think as our lives transition and evolve, the universe brings us to people that resonate with that. And I will say the friendships and the connections and the path that I've developed since leaving Christianity has been so affirming and so life-giving, something that I really look forward to sharing with others. So I hope this message is something that's affirming for you. For others, it may resonate with you in different ways, or for some, it may reinforce that perhaps you do want to maintain that sort of religious understanding and connection. But I hope that this is something that either way promotes permission-giving decisions around our own personal spiritualities. And really just finding your own path is the most important.